Hello and welcome. I'm Carolyn Grimminger with the Public Affairs Forum of the First Unitarian Universalist Church of Austin. Our program's mission is to nourish the mind and spirit and serve social justice. Our forums occur on most Sundays at noon and are free and open to the public. We encourage you to attend. Our church is physically located at 4700 Grover Avenue in Austin, Texas. For more information about our Public Affairs Forum, you can go to our church website at www.austinuu.org. Now please welcome Bonnie Gardner. She's going to introduce our speaker today.
Today I am honored to introduce Nelson Linder, who's been a highly effective social justice advocate in our community for a long time. He's currently president of the Austin branch of the NAACP. He's a talk radio host, and he's an insurance agent with his own company. He has helped shape social policy by advising local elected officials, members of law enforcement, human services representatives, and other community leaders on a wide range of issues affecting the African American community. In his talk, he's going to be discussing the current mayor's task force on institutional racism and several topics, including the concept of restitution and reparations as just remedies for eliminating disparities in income, education, and opportunity between the African American and general population. Originally, Mr. Linder's from Central Georgia. He entered the U.S. Army in 1976, and then he arrived in Austin and graduated from Houston-Tillotson University in 1984 with a degree in personnel management and industrial relations. In 1992, he founded the controversial Garvey Allen Washington Project, an organization that combined the philosophies of Marcus Garvey, Richard Allen, Booker T. Washington, and W.E.B. Du Bois. And that organization focused on self-empowerment and social justice for African Americans. They also emphasized coalition building with other organizations. In 2000, he was elected president of the NAACP, the Austin branch. He's been interviewed on a variety of TV programs, including those on CNN, BET, and the Washington Post. And he's appeared on local TV programs on issues on police brutality, housing discrimination, and others. He's had a lot of news coverage in various places. His most recent nationwide TV appearance was on MSNBC with Dylan Ratigan. He's working on his first book entitled The Empowerment Mode and the Price of Nonconformance. That sounds very, very interesting. In 2006, Mr. Linder joined Austin Community Radio Station, KAZI, and he's a host of the Wake Up Call Empowerment Mode. That's on Tuesdays, which focuses on solution to problems faced by African Americans. He's written a position paper called Unfinished Business, dedicated to continuing the pioneering work of the civil rights movement. That's his life calling, really. He's currently a member of the Austin-Travis County Hate Crimes Force. He's also a member of the Austin Charter Revision Committee and is writing a new book, Minimum Force Necessary, designed to address issues of police brutality. Let's give a big hand and welcome Mr. Nelson Linder. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Let me first say good afternoon. This is one of my favorite places, of course. I've been here before. I want to thank Bonnie and his church for the work you do. Your work stands out. These forums are very powerful and very important. But I always hear a question like, what do we do to get more people? Of course, that's $1 million question. I don't think you really need more people because, frankly, these are very tough issues, which means each person has to make a personal choice to get involved, stand the test of time, and address these kinds of issues. And frankly, this is not a popular idea. These are very uncomfortable issues. So the folks who lead the way are leaders. So it's on you to take this back to your people, make them uncomfortable, tell them the truth, and see if they come forward. But let's be clear that some things in the world really don't change. For example, gravity, what goes up normally comes down, right? So despite all the changes in the world, some things are constant. And so let's keep things in perspective. These are critical issues, been around for a long time, and we don't have all the solutions, but we do our part. And by having an intelligent dialogue like this with people like C.K. Prince and others here today who obviously made the trek out here, I'm very hopeful we can make some progress. He was a big part of the mayor's task force, by the way. He was a guy that put this stuff together for the most part and do all the criticism it takes to do something like this. And he stood the test of time. Shifting gears, again, pat yourself on the back. This is very good work, and I love being here. I love the environment, the intensity. In fact, I was even challenged walking in the door. Always makes for a good presentation. Look, I mentioned the mayor's task force and what it represents, but before I even go there, we've got to address the present environment because things are happening so fast. I was at a town hall event on yesterday at the Travis County Sheriff, the Millennium Entertainment Center in East Austin, and had a great forum with Travis County Sheriff's Department. They're one of the best law enforcement agencies in the country right here in Austin, but we don't consult them very much. If you see that report on racial profiling, it's pretty much the way it should be. The stops are based on the population of different groups, which is what we call for all the time. They have very few complaints on racial profiling. They say they have zero. It might be a little higher than that, but they do a very good job in training our officers because our officers are all trained for the most part in the Travis County Jail. They meet the population before they become officers. They learn how to diffuse situations. They see the demographic changes, the differences, and so they're comfortable addressing people who don't look like them. So that program is very effective. In terms of use of force, their training is among the best in the country. In fact, one of their former officers, Major Mark Sauer, is a national trainer for the FBI. And they're on a whole nother level in terms of how they address use of force. We talk about things like de-escalation. And about 2 months ago, I went to Lakeway, Texas, which is a very interesting place, right? Beautiful community, not very diverse, but they have a lot of bright people out there, including the current police chief, Todd Radford, who, by the way, also is a federal trainer. Lakeway brought in cameras a long time ago. One of the first cities in Texas to bring in body cameras. When I was there at the training, it's a house full of people, by the way. I think it was like a Wednesday morning, I believe. Including the mayor was there. He was in the building during the conversation. And I looked around, and I was the only black person in the audience, and that's okay. I'm fairly common doing that. But it was a great presentation. But it focused on police officers and how they see things and how they respond to things. Didn't focus on the subjects of population, focus on police officers, how they respond to stress, what their experiences are they used to dealing with different populations. But more importantly, it talked about how to make sound decisions in the face of stress at an incredible rate of time. And so they test these officers to see how they respond, and they note right away certain kind of deficiencies. And so what they do is they take these officers one-on-one and help them address their own fears, their own concerns. Then they talk about things like the best approach in those kinds of situations. You know, we've been trained, officers have, to approach situations based on set police standards, when in reality, the environment is constantly changing. For example, mental health. How do we adjust to the number of issues we see in the press nowadays with mental health? Obviously, it takes a certain kind of awareness and a new policy. They call it a policy of containment, which is you go to the scene, you understand the situation, and you try to contain the perimeter. Then you try to negotiate as opposed to forcing yourself on other people. We've had a series of shootings also recently involving mental health, and you see the same kind of behavior. So clearly, we need new approaches to those situations based on containment and sound decision making. I watched a film the other day, I might have been in England, where they showed you kind of a marked situation where a person had a knife, and they called in the police department. They surrounded the scene, which is policy containment, and had this big net. They took this net and they threw it over the suspect. and they entangled him in the net. Then they approached him gently and took him to the ground and took the knife. Now, that would never happen in America. If you got a knife in America, you're going to probably wind up being shot. So we need to advocate for policies like that, because people tell me that if a person has a knife, you only got so many seconds to respond. I don't necessarily buy that. I think the things that we can do. But it's all based on a level of comfort and how we disarm people. We need new kind of training that's mostly mental, and also that talks about new possibilities, meaning that human life is always sacred. I thought I would share that based on the current environment. I hope I'm slowing down just a little bit for you right now. I hope you're doing better with that. And I'm going to shift gears pretty fast. One of my concerns is also when we address these issues, we act like that this is something new. And I call it the Christopher Columbus syndrome. It's not new. And as much we should have learned by now that we haven't learned. Reason being, we're not comfortable taking off the gloves and having a very frank conversation about what's really going on. When I mention police misconduct, I'm talking about really a context of institutional racism. It's only one component. While it gets all the attention that it should, we're not addressing the other factors that allow this kind of behavior to continue. And I'm going to move on and say, for example, in my 17 years here, I spent a lot of time addressing a place called the District Attorney's Office. For those who don't know, we had a very important case here back in 2004, a young kid named Jesse Owens Jr. on a then DA named Ronnie Earl, who really was an institution. Had been here for like 30 years. We noticed that in those cases involving officer-involved shootings, that the scope was very narrow. It was very narrow in the investigations, and the same folks were primarily doing the investigations, and that those folks and the police officers were basically too close to each other. So there was very little criticism, very little professional distance, and as a result, we had the same kinds of decisions. But in the Orange case, the young man was shot 5 times in East Austin on Tillery Street late one night, suspected of stealing a stolen car. But when he was stopped, the car was not stolen. It was bad information. Had a police officer, I'm going to call his name, nothing wrong with that, Scott Glasgow, who approached the vehicle, tried to detain this young man. I say spooked and reached in the car. He thought he saw a weapon. It was a cell phone. He grabbed this kid, and of course the kid spooked and took off, and he shot the kid 5 times. But it was a cell phone, not a gun. In that case, we had a very informed grand jury composed of 2 former police officers. One was a captain named Freddie Maxwell, a very respected officer in East Austin. They demanded there be a thorough investigation, and they did something unprecedented in this country, almost. They indicted the police officer for criminal negligent homicide. I mean, it's a very good grand jury. And so people were shocked about this decision. Well, Ronnie Earl, who was the DA at the time, said to the public after his decision that he thought the indictment was technically insufficient, whatever that means. Technically insufficient. That's what he said. Now, this is a DA telling a grand jury that your indictment is technically insufficient. So Ronnie Earl went to, at the time, African-American judge named Brenda Kennedy and said, this is an unsound decision. We need to throw it out. The judge took his advice and threw it out. So Scott Glasgow got 90 days, and Jesse Owens was buried. We allowed that decision to stand here in Austin, Texas. We called for Earl's resignation. Of course, he didn't resign, but he was shown the door eventually. But that case happened right here in Austin, Texas. Going further, another important case was 2007, Kevin Brown. I don't know if you know Kevin Brown's name. It was the first case handled by Chief Arnold Acevedo. In fact, Kevin Brown was killed too in East Austin. He was at a nightclub. Somebody claimed he had a gun. We called out a police officer named Michael Olson came out to the scene. They saw Kevin Brown. Kevin Brown ran behind the club into open field. think he was shot 4 times. The final time he was shot in his back on the ground. Also, Beto fired a police officer. Remember this is 2007. First time in Austin, Texas, he had fired a police officer for killing a black person. It was 2007. Even though Kevin Brown was condemned by the police marshal's office, his tactics, the police chief, he was not, like Kevin Brown, Mike Olson, he was not indicted. In fact, a few months later, he got a job with a huge private security firm in South Austin, the biggest in the city, and became their security guy. Wound up jacking up another black kid a year later and was once again under scrutiny. I say this to say all that. These are not new issues. A lot has been done. And by the way, the same weekend Kevin Brown was killed, the DOJ, Department of Justice, finally accepted our request here to do an investigation. And then interim police chief Kathy Ellison said on the Friday evening, bring it on. The next day, Kevin Brown was killed, so they brought it on. That investigation led to 165 recommendations, reformed APD. It said, look, your use of policy here on force is deficient. That's what they said. But they didn't do a consent decree. They get a technical assistance letter. And therein began the reform we hit today. A new policy called response to resistance. You've done better, they've done better, but there are still issues here. I was asked earlier about APD today. Clearly a better department overall, but still struggling with some of the same issues. Use of force is still, I think in my opinion, disproportionate, still too high. But I do understand that this is a huge city now, it's a big city now, and there are very difficult situations. In fact, as I speak, last night, a young man was killed downtown. Another black man was killed. Now, when there's a weapon involved, we take a very different approach to these issues. We have a period of cooling off. We don't really say anything. We got our facts. And we'll say something about the shooting maybe 3 days later. We encourage the APD to do the same thing. This was a personal incident involving 2 different organizations, 2 groups downtown. And when you shoot in the air, we know that's a different situation. It's public safety. But do know that somebody was killed last night right here in this city. I said all that to say this. When I see people talk about police issues there in Austin, they don't really do the history. They start somewhere in the present, and you're not going to capture the whole situation of work that's being done and our remaining challenges. And it's very frustrating. Every time we have 1,000 different groups now doing the same thing. But when you talk about history, nobody seems to want to read history. I think that history has the lessons to solving these problems. I'm going to give you some things I talked about before I get into the mayor's task force. These things mean real reform. Bunny mentioned a book I was writing, still writing, called Minimum Force Necessary. That's a federal phrase, by the way. And I've got 8 chapters I'm going to talk about briefly, but just reading the titles. The first chapter is Unbearable Facts. When you read the shooting in this country involving black people, primarily brown people, lesser degree, it's unbearable. So there's a whole chapter dedicated to shootings and talking about these kind of challenges, how to address these things in terms of education all over the country. Started way before Ferguson, by the way. That's the first chapter. The second chapter is called Police Shield. It talks about in this country that police are essentially shielded from justice. Internal affairs, really? Internal affairs, really investigations? I don't think so. The city council goes, runs, and hides from these situations. They hardly say anything. So you got internal investigations. In most cases, the city council is not involved. They're doing better now with the 10-1 system. You've got a county attorney, DA's office, that for the most part has a very narrow scope of investigations, that primarily works with 9.51 as a Texas Penal Code. Talks about something like an unreasonable objectionable standard. In other words, if an officer does something based on their belief, they look at the objectionable reasonable standard. It's very difficult to refute that, because how can you refute somebody's point of view based on what they say about it? It's nonsense. But we don't try amending the penal code because we're afraid to. We need to amend the penal code to make sure there's a fair process there, not just the officer's belief or the so-called objectionable reasons. That needs to change, where civilians have more protection. But try doing that in Texas, and see who attacks you. Almost every union that ever been created, they have a lot of money, so most politicians won't touch this. Even right now, they're writing bills like this Senator Bland law, but we're not talking about amending the penal code, which is, to me is a real profound change. Checks and balances, which is the foundation of this government. I talk about it all the time. But we don't see checks and balances in policing. We see people, for the most part, allowing police officers to be the judge and jury also, and the DAs in many places simply promote the status quo. So you don't see much change in the checks and balances, which, by the way, has saved this country many times, and might even save it under our current president. I remind folks, it's not just presidential authority, it's also the judicial and representative. But unfortunately, on a local level, we don't think that means very much, so we don't tend to vote very much. So we, in this state, kind of concede local power to one political party, which is a shame, right? And although the NAACP is a nonpartisan organization, Nelson Linder is not. Going forward, misguided efforts. We got a lot of groups now who are trying to address these issues, and many of them are not informed properly. So there's a lot of confusion about Austin, Texas, and how we address police issues. A lot of us are bumping heads with each other when in reality, the path is very clear what we should be doing. And so that's another challenge. A lot of folks want to help, but they're not informed. And how do you really solve anything if you're not informed? Lessons have been learned, but if we're constantly going back and not forward, we can't focus on the solutions. State penal codes and civil service laws. Recently, there was a discussion about the Austin Police Model Office, because now, of course, we have a new meet and confer contract. We have a temporary police monitor named Devin DeSaw, a very bright young attorney. Most folks don't know he's a specialist in labor relations. He has an enormous opportunity to write a better contract. But people are attacking the office, saying it doesn't do anything, and they don't understand the mission of the office. They were not designed to be the DA's office. They were designed to give you political, civilian insight. And they want to get this office subpoena power. But you have to address civil service laws, and we don't seem to understand that. These laws have to be changed first before you give anybody subpoena power. And I always tell people, we already have subpoena power. We just don't use it. Going forward, 18 U.S.C. 242. 18 U.S.C. 242 is a federal statute. You might have seen the Alton Sterling case back in the news recently, where the Department of Justice, unfortunately, leaked out a decision to folks before they talked to the family. Completely unacceptable. What they said was because U.S.C. 242 did not deal with it only deals with intent. In other words, when there's a federal investigation of a shooting, the officer has to do something that was almost intentional. They don't even deal with negligence. So they came to a predictable conclusion that the officers in that shooting, believed what they was doing was correct. So there was no finding. Good news is in Louisiana, you have an attorney general now who says, wait a minute, this gets to my plate now, and we can do an investigation. That very seldom happens. So USC 242, which is antiquated statute, needs to be changed to deal with criminal negligence, homicide, not just intent. We need to change that as well. That's on the federal level. And finally, Chapter 7 is called District Attorneys as Tool of the State. Well, you should work for the people also, not just police officers. So when these cases happen in the past, we've had DAs that pretty much have been real close police officers. Thank God Margaret Moore, and I support this decision 100%, argued for it for 6 months, now has a local civil rights division. And she's been very active already in 2 very important cases. They just indicted a police officer from AISD recently. That's almost unprecedented. To have a local civil rights division is pretty much unprecedented in this country. It's a whole different approach to how we address these kind of concerns. People should be applauding Margaret Moore. But somehow we made it a debate, like, for example, what about the grand jury process? She's not going to bother the grand jury process. She said these cases, because there are racial disparities, require special considerations. So we're going to create a whole new division with a specialist, a guy named Dexter Gifford, very good attorney. He's going to lead these investigations. They're going to widen the scope, in other words, of these investigations. If you notice lately in police scene shootings, you've seen the DA right there on the scene. She was there last night. Margaret Moore was there last night. Different process, right? So let's not confuse this process. One of my colleagues and friends, Joe Harrington, criticized the process. I said, Jim, wait a minute. So you're saying this is a problem? I said, well, let's first examine the past 30 years. Where were you? Where were you? Where were the critics the past 30 years? Nobody challenged Ronnie Earl, and we did the same thing time and time and time and time after again. It's not about Margaret Moore running for re-election. She has nothing to gain. This is about solving a very critical problem in this community, which is to approach these shootings as civil rights issues when they exist, and also empowering grand juries to do more with more freedom. That's what she's saying. But the whole thing has been misrepresented, so I want to clear it up. Okay, Mayor's Task Force. We talk a lot about 1928 and the process that played a big impact on Austin being racially segregated and how it has created all the inequities and racism in the city since its inception. Well, here's the good news before the Mayor's Task Force was formed. I was appointed by Cheryl Cole in 2012 to sit on a thing called the Charter Revision Task Force. And our goal was to look at government and make recommendations that require change if necessary. And so we did. In an 8-7 vote, we voted to adopt single member districts. Most folks don't know that. A 8-7 very contentious vote. So you got single member districts. So now you've got 10 districts, 3 minorities, Hispanics, and 1 African American. There's 4 minorities on the city council. You got a mayor that's at large. We had the same system for almost 50 years with 7 representatives. So many communities we had no representation. So issues of infrastructure, unemployment, infant mortality wasn't even being addressed in certain zip codes. 50 years. So the mayor said, wait a minute, and it's promised during campaign, I'm going to try to create a process to address these situations. So he came up with a task force that dealt with institutional racism. A lot of great work been done by a lot of courageous people, led by Superintendent Paul Cruz and HT's president, Colette Pierce-Burnett. Almost a 70-page report. They really addressed the issue of housing, and housing is so critical to eliminating inequities in this city and in this country. In fact, the road to building wealth in this country is still based on home ownership. But who can live in Austin, Texas? I was doing a presentation recently, and I was told by a Caucasian person that Austin is very expensive for everybody. Kind of missed the point. Yeah, it might be. But see, for black people in the city, it wasn't just the cost of housing. We were literally displaced from East Austin, kicked out, oftentimes through taxes and lawsuits. People lost their property because they couldn't pay the taxes. They had no choice. It's happened for 20 years. So it's not bragging when I say I live in Pflugerville or Manor Del Valley. In many cases, we didn't have a choice. So it's not just the cost of housing. These people lost their property. They lost their wealth. We need to understand that. And so the Mayor's Task Force gives you a lot of research you can look at over a period of time. We don't even understand how East Austin became what it is today, frankly. A lot of people don't. It didn't happen overnight. I've been on that street working now for almost 18 years. I can tell you the first thing I saw was, one morning there was bicycle lanes outside, and I didn't know where they came from. And I worked there every day. So you think about this. Black folks have complained for 30 years about having change in East Austin. Everything we saw was bicycle lanes, okay, on 12th Street. Now, we knew that change was coming. Change was coming back then. We criticized it, nobody cared. All of a sudden, in 2006, a fellow named Todd Baxter. Anybody know Todd Baxter? You know him? Tell him I said hello, by the way, if you know him. He was a state representative. He went to our city council and said, wait a minute. You're requiring developers here to build affordable housing when they build housing complexes. We need to change that. Let's take out the affordable housing component and not make it mandatory. Our city council did in an unanimous vote, 2006 and 2007. So they gave the developers here free reign to build all this expensive housing with no affordable housing requirement. 2006. So that accelerated what we call gentrification. We saw the condos come up overnight. That was a former city council decision. I like to remind them of that. Now there's a good effort by many people to bring back the affordable housing component, and that's a good thing, but so much damage has been done. So the Mayor's Taskforce is a great document produced by scholars and common folks as well that will allow you to read the history and understand what needs to be done if you really want to, but it's a lot of data. I try to make things as simple as possible. And what I see happening there is that they have created a public policy foundation now where folks like me who argue for change can have a reference to talk about. For example, creating more housing in these areas all over this city. We need more housing here. But you're not going to get it if the developers control economics 101, because we know that the price of housing is based on the price, the number of homes that are available, the supply. It's economics, right? If you can control how many homes you build, you can also control the price. So we're saying we need to build more housing all over, not just in certain zip codes. If you build more housing overall on the market, it's going to eventually drive the price down. But it takes a sustained effort to do that. It's basic economics. This city is legendary for not doing that, for not wanting to build more housing in this kind of environment, because developers make a lot of money right now in Austin, Texas. The prices are inflated. So if you build more housing, it's affordable, you're going to cut into the cost eventually. It's a sound argument. So the task force addresses housing. It addresses a lot of stuff that we don't talk about. But primarily, you've helped government officials now to have a reference when they write policies and invest in monies in areas that need it. The biggest difference in Austin the past 100 years has been infrastructure. You know and I know, if you don't have infrastructure, you don't have growth, you don't have employment, you don't have good schools. So if you want equity, you've got to have an infrastructure that promotes that. So now we can begin to address these things in the right kind of way. But the main thing is we change the government now where we have 10 representatives all over this city. So if you elect somebody, that person has to address your issues. Not you can vote them out. That's a huge change. And there are folks who would criticize that the task force is just not a task force. I was one of them initially. They'll say, well, wait a minute, let's see what they're doing here. They're laying down a public policy foundation for future folks who write bills and write laws can begin to address these issues. Let's be realistic. You're not going to solve these problems in the next 2 or 3 years. But if you create the right remedy, you could eventually have an enormous impact on inequity. Look at the current Austin census. Right now, things like median income between black, white, and Asian people is still enormous. That's a major barometer, by the way. You look at that median income, why does that exist? Why is there such a vast difference in wealth? Those are the things we have to address and say, why is that? How do we close the gap? Well, through opportunities. We need to have good schools. Just last week, I was talking to a friend of mine named Garrett Groves, who works on the state level, the Public Policy Strategies Foundation. He had a map of every school district in Texas. And he broke it down to a color-coded map. Red was white. I think nicely. Red was black. Blue was white. And orange was brown. He showed us all these rich school districts in West Texas. But when we find white people in large numbers, you find better school districts, more money, exclusive districts. You go farther right into East Texas, you see more black people. Less money, less academic performances, all across the board. Even right here in Austin, places like LBJ and Reagan made the list. I won't even mention Eastside Memorial. It's that obvious. So if you have an education system that's not functioning all over the state with inequities, what's going to happen, folks? It starts with education, right? We have to fix these kinds of disparities. Going forward, I know I'm getting close to my time limit, I'm going to say this. For at least 20 years, I studied a thing called the Luxembourg Agreements. Those who don't know, it came out of Germany during World War II. And it says that whenever a population of people have been deprived of labor, deprived of liberty, deprived of opportunities, that reparation is a just remedy. International standards happen all over the world. I believe that these issues in America are too big for most political processes. You're not going to create equity by doing a study and allocating resources in the present time, we've got to come up with a system that addresses, for example, the virtue of home ownership. We've got to figure out some way to empower folks who have never had the proper opportunities in this country. And that's a lot of courage because most folks can't handle that in America. In the 1930s, there were many opportunities for black folks to get houses from the government, but we weren't given opportunity based on racism. But many white people were. And in America today, the biggest difference in wealth accumulation, guess what, is inherited wealth. If you take out inherited wealth, we're almost on the same page. So what does it tell you? These are systemic issues. But I'm optimistic because I think that in America, we're now beginning to ask the right questions. We're looking at things from a comprehensive standpoint, not just police, not just economics, not just education, but everything. And there are like-minded good people who I think are willing to engage these issues honestly, openly, who realize that it takes resources and commitment, not just conversation, to solve these issues. So despite the current national political leadership in this country, like we're going back and things happen in this country for a lot of reasons, sometimes they happen to get people's attention. And I can guarantee you we've not got people's attention, right? So the folks who didn't vote, who didn't get involved in local government, now know that local government is very important. Always has been. So we're poised now to make a difference in this very contentious, very frightening, very dangerous political environment where people seem to can't handle stress anymore. We're seeing all kind of atrocious individual incidents, hatred, racism. We have to be careful in what we say and how we say it. But most of all, we've got to reach out beyond our comfort zones and talk to folks who don't look like us, but who share the same value system, the same virtues, who realize that it's a virtuous thing to talk about empowering poor people and making sure that the folks who don't have get decent opportunities. So we can eliminate disparities in infant mortality. We can eliminate disparities in employment, in education. And in Austin, Texas, we have an enormous opportunity. But let me say this in closing. We have a reputation around the nation as being a bunch of good talkers. We talk a lot. We brag about our liberalism. I tell people all the time, liberalism is not anti-racism. I'm sorry. You might like me and love me, but where is the evidence of that? I like it that you're liberal, but show me a little bit more. Like policies that address these disparities. My friends who are conservative, I tell them all the time, you're entitled to your belief, but no political party in America that doesn't address injustice will ever have diversity. You've got to acknowledge the experiences of other people. To my friends who are libertarian, I love the Constitution. But if you know Thomas Jefferson, he had a chance during the Declaration of Independence to deal with racism. What did he do? He drew a line through the clause that empowered black people. So these are not just political problems, these are human problems. I think there are good people in all parties. But I want to encourage folks to stand up, wherever you are, especially in the religious community, for a church to have a social justice agenda and mean it and practice it in reality, that's profound. And if more churches adopted your passion, your belief, your track record, it's be a better city. So you are a shining light in this city in terms of what you stand for. Questioning the powers that be. Speaking truth to power. And also inviting guys like me to come and have a conversation, because I get invitations, but sometimes I don't. And I'm okay with that, because I love to make people uncomfortable, because I'm fairly normal. In closing, folks, don't be afraid to ask the tough questions. Despite these dark days, there are opportunities. In fact, as I told you, I think there was an election in France on yesterday, and hopefully, thank God, Marine Le Pen didn't win, did she? I hope not. Anybody follow the France elections? It's today. I'm a day ahead, right? So we haven't got the results yet, right? But I think she's predicted to lose. That's a very important election, by the way. So it's not just here, right? These are global issues now because the world is so upside down.
6 hours later there.
6 hours later. So we'll know soon. Okay. See, even there, we've seen England, we've seen Germany. See, these are global issues now, so you got to see the whole world and understand that we're fighting, in many ways, the same struggles. But of course, I live over here, so therefore, my business is primarily here. I hope I covered enough in this period of time. Time flies, and I want to encourage folks again, focus on solutions, great work being done, bring folks out, not just conversation, take positions and fight for justice and equity, whoever you are. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Brother Linder, for all the decades of heroic work you've done for our community. So I have two quick questions. First one is, when you talk about our educational system, it seems like the system doesn't serve the people. We don't teach young people how to read or think or really how to make decisions, or how to create jobs or get jobs or keep jobs. It's all about some sort of academic work that doesn't really take people where they need to go. So if I'd like you to comment on that. And then B, our positive new district attorney, great compliments to her about opening the picture. She's hired former police to be her detectives. Do you see that creates any kind of a conflict of interest? Or
Mike Loomis, Mike Sheffield, Jim Beck, Wayne Vincent, Ken Cassidy, those are all union presidents, by the way. Mike Loomis, 20 years ago, was probably the most progressive. He's done great work in Lockhart. No, not at all. I think that was a great decision. Not just Loomis. If you notice now, she also hired Dexter Guilford, an African American. She's trying to give everybody something, which is what most great politicians do. So that was the point. She hired a guy who is highly respected across the board. I'm worried about Mike Loomis doing investigations. No, because there are checks and balances. If we're going to pay attention to Mark Moore, who I like a lot, but that's beyond liking somebody, I can assure you, if there's an issue about a case not going to trial or going to court, we'll be the first one on the scene criticizing her. So no, I'm not worried about Mike Loomis. I think it's a very balanced staff she has, and she's done a great job of bringing in people with different point of views who realize this is a new day and a new opportunity. Education, quickly, I'll give you an example. I work a lot with the Turkish American community. You might know about the Harmony schools, best schools in the world dealing with science and math. And I was talking about educational achievement and comparing it to what we see in Austin. They said, Nelson, here's your problem. See, we don't just teach math and science. We teach also ethics, how to be a good student, how to be a good teacher. We teach about responsibility in our classrooms as well, about academic excellence in general. We've got to reform education in the city and this country and teach a lot more than just the basic subjects, okay? See, I was pretty good in school, but I had a civic teacher who took an interest in me personally, said, one day you'll make a difference, because you have to. We need to have different kinds of conversations where teachers play more of a role in encouragement, and we should too as parents, because in this current society we live in now, everything is technology. My son, all of this stuff is on his cell phone. I said, look, go write a good essay and let me critique it for you. He hates writing. So we need technology, but we need to have the old things like writing and interpretation as well. We still need balance in the educational system, but most of all, we need equity in education. We need to address those kids who might have instability in their households, whose parent might be unemployed. You got to address everybody. It's not one size doesn't fit all. We need more opportunity in education still and more room for individuality. Classrooms are different. I'll stop there based on time.
Del Seaton Medical Center is going to open up in a few days to replace Brackenridge, and given the city's high stratification level, is it going to be sufficient to handle the city's population load, or will Austin have to construct another hospital in a few years, like Houston has 2 hospitals, to handle people who are low income?
I saw a report about 2 months ago about why Dell is doing this, but also I saw a report that talked about all the inequities east of I-35 going from Round Rock to Austin, things like infant mortality, the lack of good health care. Look, to your point, I think that is a great idea. It'll have an impact, but it's not enough. But I know from the people that I talk to, it has inspired other people to do the same thing. So this is just a beginning. And I think based on what I've heard, you can see more medical organizations begin to do the same thing. So no, we can't handle that kind of capacity because, let's be honest about this, this stuff is created year after year after year after year. They're going to have a firm impact, but they need more support. And I think from what I'm hearing, that there are many folks in the city who are dedicated to making sure that what Dell is doing is going to be expanded and bring in more organizations and more opportunity to address these kind of concerns. And that too is a short answer, but great question. But I think it's a great decision to do what they're doing. I'm proud of that. But I know there's room for a lot more people to get involved, and they are getting involved. We're going to see a lot more happen there very shortly.
Yes, with the changing social media world, how have media outlets like Facebook and Twitter, how have they impacted your work and the causes you're involved in?
Well, you know, I was told initially, Nelson, don't touch social media because you're such a controversial guy. They're going to kill you. Well, they were right, but you know what? I took off the gloves. I want to have a conversation. So I joined these young folks, and when they say something stupid, I will confront it. Look, it can be a frightening thing, but it's also an opportunity. I'm not a dinosaur. I want to survive. So when I see these kids saying stuff, and you see the buzz, and I engage them. And now let's, and I know a lot of them. Well, let's kind of examine your premise here and see if it's right. Most times it's wrong. When we engage them in an instructive way, they kind of listen. And then I tell them, look, if you're going to say something, remember now, a lot of folks listen to stuff. You can cause a lot of problems. Take a little time, do your research, and make sure that whatever you say, even on social media, there are boundaries. So I joined and encouraged them, if you want to be taken seriously, this is not just a conversation. You can say something that has life and death consequences. But by joining them with respect, it allowed me to get us out of the head a little bit and say, look, whatever you do here, just like regular media, try to find the fights and try to be as responsible as possible. It's been a challenge, but also it's opened up a lot of doors. Now, most of them, for some reason, tend to like me a little bit, so I can talk to them because I don't put them down. I try to invite them to be more responsible and realize that they're still ethnics, even on social media. So whatever you say, you know, make sure you're saying the right thing. You're not attacking people, that you know what you're talking about. But it's certainly a challenge, but I think also if we embrace it, we can shape it. But if we just condemn it, it gets even worse. So I try to embrace it, shape it, and have an impact.
So I have a question. I'm really troubled by all these, obviously, these people who are being killed by the police. One of the justifications on policy I hear is that, like, well, if we're going to shoot, we shoot to kill. So I've always asked that question in my mind, can there be, like you were talking about the nets and things like that. So what I heard you saying earlier was changing the policy about shooting to kill. Would that be a possibility for the police departments to change that policy, or could you speak more about harm reduction, if that's a term you could use, about intervening in these situations?
I'm going to cite the Department of Justice because when we talk about response to resistance, we're talking about when you pull your weapon, it needs to be justified. It's a life or death decision. Otherwise, you shouldn't pull it. But this is not the Wild Wild West. You can't pull a gun and wink somebody because bullets, they go where they want to go. That won't work. The issue is going to be, was use of force justified? If it was justified, was it less lethal or more lethal? Well, we see a lot of times, I mentioned the FBI training, oftentimes you see people using force when it's not really justified. Let me give you a quick case. Young lady was killed here recently out in South Austin. She had a history of mental illness, and unfortunately that wasn't addressed by even some family people as well. She lost it one day and got into a car and just ran off and ran toward the officer, missed him. Eventually had an accident. The car was disabled, but she got out of the car with a knife. It was a very small knife, and approached the officer, and he shot and killed her. We're challenging those kinds of decisions. We're saying if she's been disabled in a car and has a knife only, you're in your car, why not do a policy of containment with force? In other words, do a perimeter. But as far as winging people to shooting people less lethal, that's not going to happen because the policy doesn't support that. I think it's all in your decision making. I think there are solutions out there that are less lethal. We have to train people in this society who use their guns all the time to use our masks more, but also use things like bean bags that can disable. I'm not a big taser fan, but bean bags can be very effective in cases like that where there's a knife, person working towards you, beanbags can take people down. We don't use the beanbags enough in this city. So we're calling for more, less lethal options.
Hi, Andy Sams. Our program today was put on by the high schoolers, and they kind of reflected back on growing pains that they'd gone through in their lives. And I think it's really important as we have so many new citizens join our community here in Austin, that we reflect back and we kind of learn from the past. As painful as it may be, it helps us point us in a direction for the future. So I was wondering if you could kind of paint the picture of kind of a father of a 2-year-old, and I imagine her being 18 and graduating from high school 15 years from now. I'm wondering, in a best case scenario and a worst case scenario 15 years from now with regard to educational equity and affordability, what would those look like, a best case and a worst case scenario for Austin, Texas?
Great question, by the way. And let me give my premise before I say anything. I was told about 10 years ago that based on the displacement of black people in the city of Austin, within 10 years, we probably have about 2% black population. I didn't accept that. I challenged that because I know that you can change policies and change how populations, where they live. You can reverse trends over history. It's shown that people leave, they come back, they leave, they come back. Regarding young people, our kids are very intelligent. And thank God most of them are in very diverse environments. They get along on well. My son is 16, and his friends are like the United Nations. They're a lot smarter than what we think. And one thing I got to tell you about them, they don't like racism, okay? They don't like racism. They're having very meaningful conversations. What I have to do is make sure they understand the role that civic engagement plays in shaping your society. I can get them to watch a city council meeting or county commissioners, which is very boring, by the way. But they watch it. Then they have a conversation about it. Kids are very bright. And they are so bright, I see them making things a lot better with our guidance. But the kids are going to be folks like us who've seen this stuff before. We have to stay involved with what they're doing. And sometimes we have a tendency to criticize, which is a bad policy. We need to understand and get their attention and gradually influence them. What I'm hearing among the kids I see in different school systems, they have a pretty good grasp on social policy. They should be more focused on government, how it works, but also their responsibility. And the other thing is, we can't go back and stay there, we can go back and learn, but each generation has to find its own responsibility. We need to help them identify the problems today, but also help them focus on solutions based on best practices from the past. And we don't often do that. So what is this generation's responsibility? They need help with that. Because nothing stops. It's a continual evolution of us going forward, hopefully, at least most of the time. They need to be taught that and told that, then led by example.
Our next question is from Douglas Bauer.
Thank you. Early in your presentation, you mentioned several people that have been shot with mental health issues. And I was wondering if you could comment a little further on the interaction between racism, mental health, police shootings, and how you would like to see it being done differently.
No, you're right. In fact, when I talked to Margaret Moore, who's a good friend of mine on Friday morning, she mentioned that her biggest challenges right now is the mental health issue, an issue involving narcotics or drugs. Because a lot of kids in jail in this county who have minor drug offenses who shouldn't be there, she's trying to address that. And on mental health, she's brought in a lot of social agencies to come up with policies where we understand what it means to be mentally ill and come up with better practices to address these things. She's bringing in law enforcement saying, look, let's look at some best practices around the country, see what folks are doing to save people's lives. And here's what I can tell you, something I've talked about a lot. During the recent shooting I mentioned in South Austin, young black lady, if you notice, not just police, when you get an EMS call, emergency call, how you report that call is very important. If somebody's telling you they're going to blow up something and you see rambling, that might be an indication of mental illness. You got to convey that as quickly as possible to the police department. We're not doing that. If you get a call saying some person is doing something, but you see that there is a possibility of mental illness, that needs to be cited in the phone call. They need better intelligence. And what she's doing is she's examining how these calls go out to police officers. saying if it's a mental health call, we need to make sure we maybe warn people, look, this might be a person who's on some kind of mental duress. That way you get to a policy of containment as opposed to just engagement. And what she said was, now, agree, we're engaging folks who are mentally ill. We don't know how to deal with them. So we got to have new policies based on containment. I'm seeing some of that. But I can tell you this, she's made it her top priority. When the DA says that, that's meaningful. Then it gets back to us. Because, see, one of my cases here in 2002 was Sophia King. I got to say this. She was killed over in East Austin. But there was a long conflict between her and an apartment manager. The day before she was killed, she was engaged by a mental health officer for 2 hours on that property. The problem is the next day, during the conflict, he didn't share that information. So she was killed. Could have been a beanbag, but it was bullets. So we got to share the intelligence. Law enforcement has to communicate with EMS. We have to know what we're dealing with. And too often, just like this past weekend in Ball Springs, Texas, we're going into situations not having our facts. If you don't have the facts as much as you know, you better be careful and get back into a containment strategy. If you notice in Ball Springs, there was a gunshot, people panic, they claim. Cop goes out. He's totally out here full of adrenaline. Shoots into a vehicle, which is denied by almost all policies. You don't shoot at moving vehicles. It's almost uniformly accepted. Killed this kid who was not armed, was not drinking, was innocent. So the key is going to be intelligence. Get the information, be as calm as possible, and before you engage, try to at least understand and communicate as much as possible. That goes for mental health. It goes across the board, really, with law enforcement. We need to slow things down and make sure we know what we're addressing, because if you know what you're addressing, you can have a more effective approach. But that's what Margaret Moore is doing. That's what we're talking about now, and it's gaining a lot of power, by the way, all over the country. We got to reapproach these situations based on knowledge and information, and more of a focus on mentally ill people. Because in Austin, Texas, there's a lot of contact with mentally ill people, and much of it is outdated. So she's going to have the policies change. So is Sally Hernandez as well, the sheriff department. They're writing new books on how to approach the mentally ill. So we're seeing a lot of growth here now in terms of understanding mental illness, and I think we need more of that. We need to demand that in every situation, by the way.
Thank you so much for coming out for the
Thank you.
presentation.
Thank you. Thank you.